Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Fallout for PC and Mac. This is a role-playing game developed by Black Isle Studios and published by Interplay in 1997, and it's the spiritual successor to a game called Wasteland, which Interplay had also done back in 1988. But they weren't allowed to actually make a sequel to it because the rights were owned by EA at the time. So they made Fallout instead, which really doesn't have much at all to do with Wasteland apart from the basic idea and just being called a spiritual successor. They share the post-apocalyptic theme, and that's kinda it. But anyway, this game was released to absolutely massive acclaim, and it's still considered one of the best role-playing games of all time by a lot of people. So the question there becomes, is it really one of the best role-playing games of all time, or are people just blinded by their nostalgia of it? Well, nostalgia hasn't blinded people to the fact that the visuals for this game have not aged well at all. It was average at best in 1997, and so in 2012 it's pretty terrible. Which isn't really a bad thing, to be honest with you. This game doesn't focus on the graphics. Even back then it didn't. The sprites themselves are pretty undetailed, and partly because of hardware limitations. And the animations are pretty Spartan. They do what they need to do to convey a given action. Like, say, if you shoot a gun, it looks like you're shooting a gun. It doesn't look like you're just wiggling something around or throwing something at somebody or something like that. So, they're serviceable. They do what they need to do to convey what they're trying to convey. The environments are kind of washed out. There's a lot of brown and gray and not much else. And so it makes it a little bit difficult sometimes to tell what's interactable and what's not. You have to basically rely on your mouse cursor for that, and sometimes that can be a little bit annoying. Because you'll be sitting there pixel hunting like in a point-and-click game sometimes, which I'll admit, that does get a little bit annoying, even though I like point-and-click games. So, to do it in a role-playing game is especially irritating sometimes. But anyway, the art style was a 1950s mixed with sci-fi kind of thing that they did keep throughout the series. And if you have played Fallout 3 or New Vegas, they did keep that art style. So, it just looks obviously a lot better in Fallout 3 and New Vegas, although I don't really consider Fallout 3 to be a real Fallout game. So mostly go to New Vegas, and in fact they made a lot more visual homages to the original Fallout 1 and 2 in New Vegas. So if you've played that, then you'll be pretty familiar with how this looks, just with much lower quality visuals. And it was designed for low resolutions, so playing it on a current monitor makes the graphics themselves spread ridiculously much, so that everything just looks all weird and pixelated. So it makes the visuals extremely unappealing as a result. But it's not to the point where you're actually repulsed by them, so that's at least a fortunate thing there. As for the sound design, this is where things got pretty different. The sound effects themselves, I use this phrase all the time, do their job, and that's about it. That's all they really need to do as well. They just, if it sounds like it should, it sounds like it should. And by that I mean, if it's supposed to sound like a gunshot, it sounds like a gunshot. If it's supposed to sound like something hitting on something else, it sounds like something hitting on something else. That's what I mean. The music was actually reused in Fallout New Vegas, I might add. But it was a pretty unique style that was pretty simple, and it was really great for conveying this post-apocalyptic feel. It's not really forlorn, but nor is it really happy. It's just somewhere in the middle, and it's really atmospheric. Sometimes simplicity is the best. And a lot of these songs have stuck with people over the years. I mean, I've had people mention stuff like the Cons of New California, that particular track and stuff like that to me. But anyway, then of course there was the Ron Perlman quote at the beginning of the game. War never changes. Yes, they actually got Ron Perlman to do voiceovers in this thing for the narrations. And you also had numerous other voice actors that you may or may not know. Like Tony Shalhoub, for instance. Or Keith David. Yes, Keith David is in this. So, they had a pretty big cast for this game. And that was pretty impressive at the time. And as a result, the voice acting itself is actually really high quality, especially for the 90s. And even today it holds up well. Partly because there's a lot of humor in this game, and it's kind of a twisted, dark sense of humor sometimes. And some of that is conveyed in the dialogue, so they had to really do their acting job very well with that, and they did. So the acting has certainly stood the test of time. But some of the other bits haven't stood up as well. But luckily, that's not the major focus of this particular game. Now, what really matter here are the story and the gameplay, and when I say story, I actually mean mostly the setup, and I'll get to why that is in a moment. This takes place in 2161, about 100 years after nuclear war wiped out all civilization on the planet, which was instigated by basically a U.S. like the 1950s never ended, but technology kept expanding. So you had stuff like plasma guns and power armor and such with 1950s society. You know, that very extremely vehemently anti-communism style of the 50s, the whole Red Scare, McCarthyism and all that, mixed with a very imperialistic United States. And so as a result, you had basically all life on the planet except for a select few who somehow managed to survive everything gets wiped out. And so you have these little pockets of civilization surviving throughout the world. And part of this is due to the vaults, which are these massive underground fallout shelters that are capable of sustaining life for who knows how long, basically. Depends on the vault, depends on the situation. But you play as a resident of Vault 13, which is in Southern California, and your Vault's water chip, which is what's responsible for water recycling and pumping and such like that, that water chip breaks. So the Vault Overseer is like, okay, look, you need to go out in the wasteland, you need to find us a replacement water chip, get back here ASAP, man, otherwise we're all going to die. And that's basically your plot for about half the game. Eventually you stumble upon this plot involving mutants, and I will say no more about that particular plot, except that the motivation for that plot I found actually kind of wimpy. It was nice that there isn't really a villain in this game. There's nobody who is obviously a bad guy. Instead, they're just people with different motivations, and they actually portray that pretty well, to be honest with you. I just think that this motivation is kind of dumb. So, at least the plot itself just seemed really weird to me. Kind of out there. I know a lot of people really like that particular, the antagonist, I guess is the way you would put it. But I didn't really find it impressive, and the water chip bit was especially annoying because they give you 150 days to do it. This game has time limits. It has 150 in-game days to do this thing, and sometimes it can take days to travel. So, you're kind of just rushing throughout the whole game. That's kind of irritating. And it doesn't let you experience the finer points of this game, which is exploration and doing things your own way. This game does let you play in a variety of ways. You can be a combat class if you want. You can just run around blasting everything if you really want to. You can also run around through the game pretty much without firing a single shot if you want. Sometimes you have to because animals will attack you like rad scorpions and stuff like that. But if you want to get through this game non-violently, you can. And it's not a lot of games, even back then, that could do that. A lot of games required combat, and this one doesn't really require it per se. Sometimes you're forced into it, but very rarely are you actually encountering a situation where you can't actually get out of things by talking your way out of it. So they provided a lot of freedom to really play this thing the way you want to play it, and there's a lot of replay value as a result. The problem is that time limit lords over you, so you can't really do that to its fullest. You can't experience all of the side quests if you want to, which admittedly a lot of them are kind of generic. You know, save me, I'm being attacked by rad scorpions, or bring me this thing, bring me the MacGuffin, and etc., etc., so on and so forth. And the plot itself is fairly weak, like I said, so that kind of lords over you the entire game. But that said, when you're exploring this world, you're encountering these people with their own motivations, their own aspirations and such like that. you're meeting new party members, because this is a party-based game if you want it to be, basically. You will find people that can join your party throughout the game. You're finding all sorts of cool remnants of the pre-war era, like you'll find bits of power armor, for instance, or plasma weaponry and stuff like that. These relics of technology that were lost in time, and you can't reproduce them anymore, but somehow you can like make ammo for it and such like that. And you get these cool cultural ideas here, where it is that kind of the 1950s never ended, and it mixes in with a lot of pop culture references, and there's a really decidedly Mad Max vibe to this game. And in fact, they reference that in particular with a one-sleeve leather jacket, which looks a lot like the one that Mel Gibson wore in The Road Warrior. But there's just all sorts of cool little references to bits and pieces here and there. It has a really weird sense of humor that it is hilarious, but it's kind of a dark sense of humor that takes a little bit of a wit to actually get. And that's kind of what gives this game a lot of charm. It was a really good role-playing game back in the day because it was kind of a new thing, and we're like, oh, well, this is great. And as far as the gameplay goes, mostly it stood the test of time. That time limit is annoying. Just no problem there. The combat is a little bit weak. While you do get to do called shots and stuff like that, there's not a lot of variety. It is a turn-based game. There's not a lot of strategy involved. It's just a lot of luck, really. And the system itself, as far as role-playing mechanics goes, is pretty simple. You do get these traits in here, and that was something they kept throughout the entire series. And of course, the Bloody Mess perk has been in there since the very beginning. So you get a lot of bits that they kept in later games and maybe refined them more. But this laid the groundwork. And it's served as a kind of reference point for a lot of role-playing game development over the years. And for good reason. It's still a very solid role-playing game, and it's well worth playing, especially if you are a Fallout fan from the later games. You know, Fallout 2, Fallout Tactics, Fallout New Vegas. I don't count Fallout 3, for good reason. Because it has nothing that made Fallout 1 or 2 great. But the thing is, pretty much everything that was in Fallout 1 was improved in Fallout 2. So it's kind of hard to recommend Fallout 1 if you've already played Fallout 2, unless you just want to get the historical perspective. But as far as historically important role-playing games go, Fallout is one of the top ones, and I can do nothing but recommend it to you just for the historical sake of it. And it's still a pretty fun role-playing game despite its faults. So there you go, folks. I'll have a link in the video description box to where you can get it if you want. And thanks for watching.